reparenting your younger self. Three keys to parenting. So let's jump right into this. What does that mean and how does it apply to the families and to our children?
Sure. So, just to give you some context, I am a relationship coach. And so I work with a lot of couples who are bumping up against negative patterns. And so my job is to really unpack and figure out, at the root. My work is we drill all the way down to really disrupt what's happening in the couple so we can reskill them up. And so what we find typically is that a lot of times, if there's been trauma in the way they were raised, that part of the healing process is to actually go back and have them give themselves what they didn't receive from their own parent as a child. So we have a bit of a roadmap um, that we can kind of reverse engineer into what is good parenting because we see the impact in unhealthy couple patterns as these people go into adult relationships. So um, there's three things that are critical, and one of them is to really affirm and validate the reality of a child. And what that means is to really get into their interior world, ask questions, and really understand what's happening in their interior emotional life and affirm their reality. And so I think it's so important that parents take the time to really sit with their child and figure out, okay, why is he crying? What is this about? Because if the parent doesn't do that, then what the child learns is that it's not safe for them to express their emotions. And they might either push them down and just decide to be good and perfect. I know that was my route. Or they might decide to be rebellious and, act out. But if somebody is really listening to them and understanding what's up for them, um, there is actual circuitry in the brain. We know from the neuroscience that to have an adult who's affirming the reality actually lays down, the tracks for healthy relationships and healthy, secure attachment as an adult. So it's a developmental step that parents need to engage with their child around that is really critical. Um, and I know there's a movie that's been causing a lot of talk. It's called The Adolescents. It's a show on Netflix. I don't know if you've heard of that. And it's about some, the trials of modern day parenting. And I think one of the takeaways is, be close to your child's interior world. Like what's upsetting them these days? What's up for them? Where are they struggling? And it makes such a difference to have somebody there for you. And our job as adults and parents is to really show a child also how to regulate their feelings. So if they're having sadness, like it's okay to cry. It's okay to be with the emotions. Or if you're like a parent who says, um, like my father used to tell me, stop bawling, stop bawling. So crying was not okay in my home. And so, I was a very sensitive child and I'm told not to have these emotions. So that was really hard for me. So again, I started to push it down and my reality didn't matter as much is what I learned. And so what do I do in adult relationships? I put all the focus on the partner, and it's harder for me to bring my reality forward. So it teaches children to be transparent and to be vulnerable. These are the skills of intimacy.
And what do you think are the impacts to families, couples, children who, if there isn't a healthy form of communication or a healthy discourse between everyone involved in that household, how does that impact the entire family one way or another?
So it depends on the degree. Like if it's a very angry, rage-filled home where there's continuous disruption, it's very destabilizing. We know even on a neurological level, the cortisol levels get activated. The prefrontal cortex can't act, properly, the emotional, rational parts of ourselves. So there's a lot of dysregulation and disruption, and it becomes unsafe. And not having a place where you can feel safe and connected is really bad for the parents and the children, and it has a knock-on effect, right? It's the relational trauma is something that doesn't get talked about. We hear more about the big T trauma, if there's sexual abuse going on in the home, things of that nature. But the relational trauma that happens when there's not enough connection or too much connection is also critical to be aware of. And so it impacts the whole system. And sometimes parents think, well, the child is not seeing us fight, or they're not really involved in what's the disruption between us, but know that the child is absorbing whatever the parents have not dealt with, because the child cannot distinguish, is this my fault? Is this their fault? It tends to take it on themselves. And so there's a lot of disruption in the mind of the child because their brain hasn't fully formed yet, and they can't really assign blame to one person rationally. And so then they start to kind of make themselves wrong. So then that critical voice starts coming in. It's a whole knock-on effect.
What you just shared reminded me of my childhood, and I shared a little bit with you. Being raised by my grandmother and not my parents, by the time I was reunited with them, I didn't feel safe because earlier on, my safety was my grandmother. She was there during the first 5 years, which is a very vulnerable and informative years of the child.
Yes.
And then when I saw my parents arguing, I didn't feel safe again. So now it's compounded.
Yes.
So I think sometimes what men do, and this is for everyone, but let's give it from male perspective, is that I went outside the home for safety. And where did I
Yes.
find it? In friends. And sometimes those friends weren't the best type of people. And I've heard some women, some young girls, when they leave the house to find safety, they find it in the arms of another person, a partner. And this is where they become very sexually open, promiscuous. What do you think are some of the impacts that happens when the home isn't safe, the parents isn't safe, but everyone is trying to find safety one way or another?
It's very true. We know from human psychology that our driving force is to have our basic needs met, and we will go and do and find that in whatever way possible. Even if it's dysfunctional, it may meet our needs. It's like a human drive for affection and care. So sometimes that will land us in the wrong place. We might be lucky enough to find a mentor. Maybe we have a big brother outside the home. Maybe we have one healthy voice, an uncle, an aunt who sees us kind of in distress and can help us along the way. But left to our own defenses, we can definitely land in the wrong arms or path of poor influences. So it's definitely, as you say, it's a very seminal time as a child because these early childhood experiences lay down all of these tracks for how we think about the world, whether it's a safe place or not. Like we make unconscious decisions about safe world, not safe world. Adults we can trust, we can't trust. It becomes very black and white sometimes, and it's a hard reality that this happens to so many children.
With the people that you deal with, Marissa, what are some of the obstacles that they face in creating a safe place for themselves as well as for others?
I think that sometimes there's also a difficulty even acknowledging that, they were brought up in an unsafe um, reality, and that it has actually impacted them in their adult life. And so doing anything that might put blame or shame on the parents and, having a different frame of reference around what happened in the family home can be a bit of a mental block for a lot of people because they want to think they had a great childhood and they might have been well fed and well taken care of, physically, but emotionally, this is also the responsibility. So that can be one of the blocks. And then also, if people don't have, you know, the impetus to really have that growth mindset, which I know we've talked about, is so important to have that willingness and desire to see, okay, this is a problem for me. It's a pattern in my relationships, and I can see this is making me unhappy. It's making those people around me unhappy, and I need to do something different. I'm part of what needs to be changed here. So that ability to self-reflect sometimes can be a struggle for people. Our default is kind of more the victim mindset. This person is the problem. And, if I hadn't have been raised this way, it will be okay, but it's too late now. So a restrictive mindset can also be an issue.
I remember a time where someone was having difficulty in the home and they didn't want to talk about it because they said that it would bring shame, not only upon themselves, but about their other family members. And then they were feeling a sense of guilt. Do you think shame and guilt is also an obstacle that people face when trying to correct some of these behaviors?
It is. And, what I've learned is that you can move through those emotions without having to confront your parents. That you can come to a place of peace and understanding and assign some responsibility, but without having an in-depth conversation, because most parents are probably going to find that really hard. And so the way that my relational recovery has gone is that I come to that reckoning with other people outside of the family. And so they can kind of help me rationalize, yes, this is where they were not such a good parent, but they did all these great things as well. So that you have a good accounting of how things actually went versus the story we might have made up in our mind.
Is it difficult then for some people, regardless of their age, because I know I've experienced, maybe you did, Marissa, as well, to see their parents as people and not beings of perfection?
That is a rite of passage, I would say. It definitely is about coming into right relationship with our parents as they have grown, and now we're also adults, and realizing that they have their own weaknesses and faults. And, in my looking at intergenerational trauma, I had to go back and look at, well, how were my parents raised? What was happening in their home? What did they not get? Did they really know how to parent me in the way that I needed? So part of that consciousness has to go back deeper in the lineage as well to be able to come to, again, kind of correct awareness around our parents and what they had to go through to be a parent.
That reminds me of a conversation I had with a family member, and I asked him, he was sharing a complaint that he had with someone in the family. And this complaint has been ongoing for years, probably before I was even born. Okay. And we've all been there. We all have that one family member we just don't seem to click, regardless of our relationship to them. I asked him, what is it that you don't like that this person is doing? And they listed it. And then I asked the next question, if it was someone other than this family member doing it, a friend, a stranger, a loved one, would you continue to allow that behavior to be done? And they said no. And I told them that's the way you have to look at it. Many of us place family members, especially parents, but immediate family, on a pedestal, in a glass box. You can't take them out, you can't take them off the pedestal. And you mentioned it's a rite of passage. For that person, when I spoke to him, it was quite difficult and they couldn't move on. Do you see some people having difficulty just looking at their parents and saying, or their family members saying that I can make a choice. Either I could be right or I could be happy, because many times we can't be both.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point because I think part of this rite of passage is learning to set boundaries, even with our family. And some family members might not be able to handle that. And, in my case, I had to really work with my mother in particular in kind of sharing what was happening for me and what I needed at this stage in our relationship. And we had to go through a negotiation, and it took some time. There were some hiccups, but that was part of my empowerment, my personal empowerment, and healing my own core and finding my voice and doing it in a relational, respectful way, always. I think that's really key how you deliver or request boundaries is, I think, where some people can go sideways, so that there's a respect in that conversation. And sometimes people are of the consciousness where that's going to make it worse. And as you say, sometimes we might need to have a more arm's length relationship with that family member for our own happiness, because it's just too hard to navigate.
What are some of the ways then you could suggest to people in general who want to set appropriate boundaries with their family members, but they may be struggling because they are their family members?
Yeah. So, there are a few pieces to that. And I think the first piece is just sharing impact and just saying, hey, I've noticed I've had some upsetness. Each time we get together, you ask me why I'm not married, and it's been causing some anxiety for me. And it feels like this is important to you. But I'm noticing that it's not feeling comfortable for me. And, I'm happy to share when that happens in my life. But if I could just ask you not to do that when we're around each other, that would be really helpful for me and help me want to maintain our connection.
Marissa, as we close, I'm going to give you three wishes, and you can wish for anything that you want in regards to this question. And the question is, what are three things you wish people knew about themselves before entering a relationship after they've done their healing from a trauma in their family?
I would say having clarity on your top two values are really important, because 95% of relationship is partner selection. And so if you can get that right on the way in, it's going to be a lot more easier for you. And so having clarity about the things that are most important to you over time and making sure there's a degree of alignment with your partner, I think is really important. What else? I would say, having skills on board and a repair mechanism is going to optimize your chances of a healthy relationship. Some people do the healing work, but they might not have the skills. There's two arcs to relational recovery. One is the skills of relationship, and the other is trauma recovery. Have you got yourself to a healed enough place so that you're not foisting your 5-year-old on your partner?